Okay, in this video I want to briefly introduce some of the mechanisms that the Panzer Korps rules use to affect the quality and the effectiveness of a particular force. Given a certain number of troops, a certain number of equipment, battalions and so on, how can you adjust the effectiveness of that to reflect the real life quality of the troops? There are a number of mechanisms that the rule sets use. Probably the most important, the most significant, is what's called the decision die and the colour of that. As you can see here on the screen, there are 5 colours. The most effective is black on the right and across to yellow on the left, which is the poorest. And this reflects not just or not even mostly the quality of the individual general, but really the effectiveness of the command and control, the staff operations, and the way in which the particular army was able to mobilize its troops and get its battalions where it wanted them. The way this works, I'll have a video section on this topic as a whole, but in brief, for each force command you roll a decision die each turn, and using this table that determines how many units will be able to move. The better your score, the more units can move. If you score really well, you get some free bonus moves, or you can auto rally some disorder. The colour of the die influences how well you're likely to score, and the assignment of that colour to a particular force is one of the decisions that a scenario maker has to take in order to show how well a particular army performed. As you can see, if you look at this table carefully, this could have been done using simple pluses and minuses to a single die roll, but Manny's decided to do it this way, and I think it's a good idea. It adds colour, and it's more memorable. It's easier to remember that this particular force has a black decision die because it's particularly effective. This one over here is a bit of a shambles. It's got a yellow die. The second mechanism is the quality of the general. This is more about the individual leading the force, the major general or whatever the level might be. That's the sort of rank. And as you can see here, the quality of the general ranges all the way from A to H. And there's some titles there. An A general is legendary leader, all the way down to an unreliable one. Most generals, as you would expect, fall somewhere in the middle, a career officer E, or a slightly better than that, a D. But again, the scenario maker will judge the quality of the general, or generals. This can happen at a lower level than the actual whole force, and assign one of these levels. And this has an influence on quite a number of things. It affects, for example, which side has the initiative each turn. Those adjustment figures you can see there are used as a modifier to initiative die roll, but it appears elsewhere as well. A third factor that's used, which is mostly about national characteristics, is something called the intrinsic command score. This is a percentage. When a force, either one of the individual force commands or indeed the whole army, reaches 60% level, that 60% of its individual units are either surrendered or gone, or more likely in a state of panic or severe disorder. When it reaches that 60% level, it has to roll a dice to see if it can carry on or if it will retreat. And the percentage that it's got to meet is called the intrinsic command, and this essentially, the higher this is, the more likely it is that an army will continue to fight. And it ranges all the way from something like 25% for extremely weak or fragile forces, all the way up to about 80% for the most rugged and reliable ones. So again, the percentage, the intrinsic command number, can be used by the scenario writer to influence the resilience of the army as a whole. As I said, it's mostly set by nationality and date sometimes, and there's a table in the rules which gives that, but it's entirely open to the scenario designer, or you as the person building a battle, to adjust that for particular circumstances if a force historically was performing much better or much worse than its national average. Another aspect which influences the performance of the army is down at the individual unit level now, and that's troop quality. Here's a table. This is extracted from the morale chart, and again, troop quality appears in a number of different places. It doesn't only affect morale, it also affects, in many cases, the actual combat performance. And as you can see here, the individual units can be rated all the way from hardened, which are the very best troops, down through the more normal veterans and regulars, which is where most of an army will typically sit, down through extremely poor and fragile troops, variously recruits or militia or partisans. As an aside, and I'll talk about morale again in a different video, but as you can see there, the more reliable, more experienced troops will use a higher level dice to roll on the morale charts, and they also have more opportunities to recover from panic. One of the mechanisms in this rule set is that battalions will panic or fall back and then recover and return to the line a number of times in a battle before they are finally worn out and have to retreat permanently. And that number on the right hand side of this table tells you, for example, that partisans, once they've gone, they've gone. But the very best troops will actually be able to recover up to 4 times and return to the fight before they're washed out. The final mechanism I wanted to mention, and I go into a little bit more detail in the video about formations and building your army, is decorated leaders. Again, this is a concept which I don't think I've seen anywhere else. Decorated leaders represent the experienced officers within your army, or perhaps NCOs, people who've fought in many battles before and know how to lead and motivate an army. You will be given a number of decorated leaders for each force command by the scenario or the scenario designer. You as the general have to decide between 2 different uses for those leaders. You can either give them to the headquarters, where they represent experienced staff officers, and they act as a +1 or +1 per leader modifier to that decision die I talked about. So if you've got a couple of experienced staff officers, then you're going to be able to get more of your units moving more often. The other choice you have with decorated leaders is to put them with the fighting battalions, and each leader with a battalion will automatically rally off 1 point of disorder each turn. And as you'll see when I talk about combat and morale, disorder is the main mechanism whereby units become progressively degraded and less able to fight. And so having decorated leaders with that unit will make it again much more resilient and more likely to recover from incoming fire and more likely to stand in a line for longer. So those are the mechanisms that are in the rule book to adjust the quality of your force. And tweaking those one way or another allows for quite subtle variations in the performance of a force, and where you're building a historical scenario, the use of those to match what we saw in reality is one of the important parts of the scenario designer's art.